Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I'm just delighted today to introduce you to Jill and Mark Savage. Jill has written 14 books, including 2 with Mark, and together they publish resources to help couples recover from infidelity and safeguard their relationship. Mark spent more than 20 years in ministry, while Jill ran Thriving Hearts at Home, encouraging women in relationships and parenting while raising the couple's 5 children. Their 2017 book, No More Perfect Marriages, launched their thriving ministry, speaking, writing, and coaching couples through workshops and marriage intensive weekends. Jill and Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, we are so glad to join you today.
Oh, well, it's just great. You guys have so much great information and wisdom that you share that I know so many of our marriage champions are really going to get a lot out of. You know, the 2 of you were moving through life together, had ministry, raising children, Jill writing mom, supporting mother books. Then you had a dark year. Can you share, this is something that you share with your audiences, but can you kind of talk about what happened and how your reaction launched your ministry together?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So I had been a pastor for 20 years and retired from pastoring, but I didn't realize how worn out I was, how depleted I was from being a pastor. And uh, when I left pastoring, I created my own home remodeling business. And part of that was a 2x4 doesn't argue with you about what it is. It's a 2x4. And so I was kind of just trying to isolate myself into something that would have less uh, anxiety and less stress. And uh, shortly after leaving pastoring, I found myself really spiraling into
Yeah, go ahead.
depression and just a deeper sense. I was lost.
Well, and you had struggled emotionally off and on over the years
Hmm.
because Mark came from an abusive upbringing. And really, that trauma had affected him in a lot of different ways that even though you had tried to do counseling for, we just never found
Right.
the right counselor. So that still was dogging you at this point in the
It
game
was.
as well. And so you've had a lot of discouragement in your relationship with the Lord, your relationship with yourself, shame, all of those things that
Hmm.
were a part of childhood. And now you've left ministry and you've started to lose
Yeah.
yourself.
And bottom line, life wasn't rolling out the way I had planned, the way that I wanted it to be. And I found myself in a full on midlife crisis. And I was ticked at everybody, God included, uh, the church, Jill, everybody was a problem but me. And I found myself in an affair. And I ended up leaving Jill and my kids for this other relationship, thinking that it would be better.
And as you can imagine, the world, the bottom dropped out of my world. I mean, I would have put us in the category of, oh, that will never happen to us. But I saw Mark struggle and spiral emotionally, spiritually. I knew he was struggling, but I just didn't know to the depth of his struggle. And so when all of that happened, I mean, I just, Lord, what do you want me to do? I don't even know what to do with this. And, Amy, the only thing I heard the Lord say to me is, I want you to love him. That was it. And I remember the day that God delivered that message to my heart because I was like crying on my living room floor, like tears are flowing. I'm face flat on the ground. And I remember standing up and like looking up at heaven and going, you've got to be kidding me, God, because I don't know if you've noticed, but he's not very lovable lately. And God whispered back to my heart, I don't know if you've noticed, sometimes you're not either.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, okay, Lord, you love me when I'm unlovable. I don't know how to do that. I only know how to love somebody who's loving me back. So you're going to have to show me how to do that. And so God took me on a year-long journey of learning to love his way, and sacrificial love, love because you're called to love, not because it's reciprocal in any way. And I didn't know if our marriage was going to make it or not, but I began to realize, hey, there's some things I need to grow in. And what I often say is, I didn't cause my husband to have an affair, but I contributed to the dysfunction in our marriage. And I decided now's as good time as any for me to start to look at that. So I learned to love deeper. I looked at my critical spirit. I looked at my tendency to avoid um, emotional connection, because I grew up in an avoidant family. And I began to dig into that. And I thought, I don't know if my marriage is going to make it or not. And at that point, it didn't look like it would, but I still felt like God was saying, hey, this is as good a time as any for you to start growing.
Mhm.
Which is such humility. I would imagine so many women would have said, "Hey, I'm the injured party here. I'm not." And of course,
Mhm.
this is you're going to talk about this in your resources, but for you to say, "I have some work to do too," and then you started doing it, and then that actually catalyzed some of Mark's return a little bit, because he
Mhm.
started going, "Wait a second, this is not." So let's talk about that. Talk about how that happened. And I love too how your daughter, what you said your daughter was praying. That was just so amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, our daughter was, she asked me one day after Mark had left. So Mark was home for the first 8 months of the crisis, and our kids did not know. So at that time, they were three were in their 20s, two were teenagers still at home. They knew, as they will say now, they knew dad was off.
Mhm.
They just couldn't figure out what was going on with him, but they knew he wasn't himself. And then, of course, when he left, they had to know everything. And so, because they were old enough to
Yeah.
know that.
Mhm.
So our oldest daughter said one day, "Mom, how do you pray for somebody who's having an affair?" And I said, "Gosh, Annie, I mean, I've been praying for his heart, and I've been praying for him to return to his first love and all of those things." But she and I literally Googled
Mhm.
how to pray for someone who is being unfaithful. And we came across one really unique prayer, and that is to pray a hedge of thorns around the illicit relationship.
Yeah.
And so Annie and I started praying that hedge of thorns um, around Mark and this other person. And we were praying literally that conflict would happen.
Yeah.
And it did.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
did. That was also a part of him kind of waking up and going, wait a minute, I'm having the same conflict here that I had in my marriage.
Right. So I was having the same conflict, packaged a little differently, but bottom line, it was still conflict. And I began to really become aware that the common denominator is me. And so I had asked Jill to meet on occasion, uh, because I wanted to talk through how are we going to navigate a divorce. We have kids. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. Uh, and so I had their interest in mind. And so when we would meet, I noticed Jill was behaving differently. She was slow to respond. She wasn't managing
Slow to
me,
react.
slow to react.
So I was responding gently rather than reacting
Right.
harshly.
Right.
Hmm.
And she wasn't managing me, or what I used to say is I felt parented by her. And so all of that was intriguing, and it created some inner turmoil of what is really going on.
Yeah. So really, my changes sparked hope in him. And then I do believe our prayers then
Hmm.
sparked, um, they sparked conflict in that other relationship. And so the hope mixed with really the discouragement that he was experiencing in the other relationship, I think all of that together, the Lord used to wake him up.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I know there's a lot of people out there that have prayed those same prayers and their spouse hasn't awakened. The blinders haven't fallen off. I have no doubt that the Lord is working in those relationships in the same way he was working in ours. I'm just grateful that my husband decided to respond to it.
Yeah.
Not everybody does.
It's interesting, Amy. I was saying the very things that I'd counseled people for years not to say or do. And
Wow.
one of the big uh, areas was I was convinced that my kids would be okay, and that my kids would even agree with me that, Dad, I don't know how you lasted so long. And I was just very negative in my own thinking about our marriage, about Jill. And uh, it was really, the kids also were very hurt, very traumatized. And so it was a combination of prayer, Jill changing, the kids aren't uh,
They're not
agree-
happy. They're
they're
not
not
resilient.
they,
They're not
they are
telling you.
not they are not high-fiving me on this decision at all. And so it was I began to really fall into a place of humility myself to say, Lord, I need to turn this around. I don't know what to do. Will you help me? And
That moment of surrender actually happened on Easter Sunday
yeah,
morning.
yeah,
And we like to say that Mark had his own personal resurrection that
yeah,
day. I mean, literally, he got up that morning and announced that he was filing for divorce that week,
yeah,
literally. And we were separated, but that we had actually been up in Chicago because we had a new grandbaby, and I had traveled up there by train to be with our daughter for a while. He had stayed with the teenage boys. He'd driven them all up to Chicago, and we'd come back together and we gotten back at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And so instead of Mark then driving on to his apartment, he stayed at the house. Well, the next morning was Easter. The boys got up, got themselves to church. They were on the worship team and different things.
hmm
And it left Mark and I at home. And that's when he said, "Hey, I just want you to know I'm filing this week."
and
And
and really the purpose of my filing was I had made such a mess. I felt like none of this was repairable. I needed to walk it out and just live in ruin. Uh, and and I also, in the midst of things, I didn't even remember that it was Easter. I was such a mess. And then when Jill and I began this discussion about divorce, uh, and I made the comment, I just don't have it in me to do what's needed to repair our marriage. And bottom line, I didn't even know what to do.
yeah, and the only thing I mean, I was praying before I spoke. Like, that was one of the big
Hmm.
changes I was making was, "Lord, I'm not gonna speak anything unless you give it to me."
Yeah.
And so I didn't even know what to say in that moment. I'm like, "Lord, I don't know what to say." And, a minute probably passed. It felt like, an hour, but the only thing that came to my mind is I said, Mark, Jesus didn't feel like going to the cross. He didn't want to go to the cross. He asked the Lord,
Hmm.
"Take this cup from me." But then he surrendered and said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And that moment was, I literally just saw something change in Mark, and he was like, "First, is today Easter?" "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to pray that same prayer." I mean, he like flipped, completely turned. And he did. He prayed, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done." And it was like a change came over him. I saw him physically surrender.
Yeah. I was desperate. And when Jill was having that conversation, I heard the Lord speak to me, Mark, if you'll trust me for this, I'll take care of it. And in I was a desperate man, and I totally surrendered with the decision that this is for my Lord, not for Jill or for our marriage or for our kids. This is for Jesus Christ. And I voiced that surrender, and then I said, can I go to church with you? And I hadn't been in church in months. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a schizophrenic moment. In one breath, you want a divorce, and the next breath, you're surrendering to Jesus Christ. And
180.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So cool. So as you can imagine, I mean, I didn't trust it, but I knew something was different. I knew because he had actually left the other relationship and recommitted to our marriage 7 times in that year. And so, but I knew this one was different. Like I saw it and what I experienced. And so I still didn't trust it though. But we remained separated for another 3 months. But from that point on, we began to move into a healing space.
Yeah.
And it took about 18 months of weekly marriage counseling to put the wheels back on the bus and to get to a place where we felt like we were really healed and no longer triggered by it. And we really thought that journey was for us. But honestly, about 3 years later, after our healing, is when God began to kind of tap us on the shoulder and say, it's time to share this story a little more openly. We had shared it with individuals as needed. We both had an agreement, but Mark had been really tired of living in the fishbowl that ministry is, as well as, the parachurch ministry that I led. He was really tired of that. So he's like, I don't want to ever tell this story.
God had different ideas.
Yeah.
And here we are.
And I was like, you can tell the story all you want, but I'm crawling back into my turtle shell. I'm cool. And God drug us out into the limelight and said, no, dude, this is how it's going to roll from here.
Yeah.
And really the posture for me, I think fully for the first time, was in a surrendered place, holding the hand of Daddy God and just saying, Dad, I don't know what to do. What do you want me to do? Okay, I'll go with you, Dad. And I've really tried to hold to that image that I'm just little Marky Savage holding the hand of Daddy God, doing what Dad wants. And that's been a safe place for me. It's been a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you actually told your story, Jill. You said it came out on live radio for I don't know how many people. The first time you told it together.
Oh, that was so crazy because we actually decided that we would put it on our blog and we would tell the story over 10 days on our blog. So we were like, let's do a daily 10 days blog series. We'll tell the story. Well, our blog readership went from 5,000 to 15,000 overnight. So we went, whoa. And in the midst of that, we had an opportunity to be on the Chris Fabry show. He's a Moody radio show, and it's a live. And I was supposed to be on the show. I was supposed to be interviewing for a friendship book that I had written on women's friendships called Better Together, because you're not meant to mom alone. And but Chris had read the blog and he was like, can we change directions? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, could we talk about the blog? And which in essence was our story. And he's like, and could Mark join? And so, as Mark says, he, wet his pants and said, sure, I'll go on national radio and talk about my affair.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah.
But you know what we saw, and I think that this was motivating for both of us, is, I mean, it's a call-in show, and the phone calls were coming in fast and furious. And we just saw the impact through the blog and through the radio program of sharing and giving people hope that there's, that it is possible, that you can, no matter how far apart your hearts are, they can be reconnected, restored. And as we say now, you can have a marriage 2.0 marriage. We consider before our crisis was 1.0, and now we're 2.0, and we like those folks a lot better.
Right.
We function a lot better. And many of the lessons we learned are not only lessons that people who have dealt with broken trust need to know, but just people that are married need to understand. So that really motivated us to eventually write No More Perfect Marriages book, and then to begin really focusing on marriage ministry. And we love, I think the two of us together say at least once a day, one of us will say, I love our life.
Yeah.
I love our life, and I love our ministry.
Yeah.
It's just, it's what God has for us in this season. And we're so grateful. I hate that we had to go through what we had to go through to get there, but this is how God's redeemed it and is using it in a beautiful way, turning pain into purpose.
So much hope there. And I'm quite certain that our marriage champions, there's people that are experiencing burnout just like you did. And then there's a lot of people, they're either in that space of infidelity or they know someone. I think everybody, and to be able to offer that hope. And truly, I read your blog series and it's so well done. And then the content going into the No More Perfect Marriages, you're either growing or you're slipping, just like an erosion. So let's talk about that.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, we were actually driving back from one of our counseling appointments, which that was an hour drive for us. So we would drive an hour, we would counsel for an hour, and we would drive home. And the Casting Crowns song, It's a Slow Fade, came on. And I looked at Mark and said, it's a slow fade. And one of the lyrics is, no marriage crumbles in a day. It's a slow fade. Right. I said, Mark, could we label our slow fades? Like, could we identify? Because we were doing a lot of the right things, Amy. We had date nights. We went away, just the two of us. We were speaking each other's love languages. We were doing a lot of the right things, but still this happened. How? Well, it was because of the erosion that was happening beneath the surface. And these are tiny little things that go unnoticed, unattended. We don't deal with them because they're so small that we just kind of go, oh, well, that just happens. Well, what happens though is they pull our hearts apart a quarter inch at a time. And that keeps happening until our hearts are no longer a quarter inch at a time or a half inch apart, but they're literally miles apart. And so we began to identify them literally for ourselves.
Right.
And we would share them with people in our circle, and they would go, I think that might be happening in our marriage. Yeah. And we were like,
wow. I thought this was just for us, but we began to see that they were patterns that people were experiencing outside of Jill and I. And so
we call them the slow fades.
Yep.
And we identified the slow fades that we saw were making a difference in our relationship, and recognizing that we're making a difference in others. So we wrote about that in our No More Perfect Marriages book. And, a couple of slow fades just for people to have an understanding. One is the slow fade of unrealistic expectations.
And that was the one I struggled with the most. Coming from the home that I grew up in, I had these huge expectations of what marriage and family should be. That was totally opposite of the way I was raised. And yet I had no idea how to accomplish it or to even balance it with what's realistic. And so I had very high expectations of our relationship.
And what happens with that slow fade, and the reason it's a erosion, is that when you have unrealistic expectations, they're super high, and then you have reality, which is more realistic. The
Yes.
space in between is discontentment. And so when you sit in discontentment day in, day out, day in, day out, it pulls your hearts apart just a little bit. Or in Mark's case, it pulled his heart away from me because he was always disappointed in me. He was always disappointed in our marriage. And so that,
Well, and actually, I was disappointed in God. I was disappointed in the church, in God, in everything, because I had my filter in life was unrealistic expectations.
yeah. So that was a huge one. Now, there's another slow fade, avoiding emotion. That was a big one for me because I kept my heart guarded because I grew up in a home where you didn't have emotional intimacy. Now, I grew up in a loving home, loving family, but we just didn't do emotions. If life got hard, you bucked up. So we'd been married 28 years, and Mark had probably seen me cry in 28 years twice. Like if life was hard, I kept it to myself. So therefore, what happened is I actually sent an unintentional message to my husband that I did not need him. I
Right.
didn't really, that wasn't my heart, but that, I mean, I just get strong. And so I don't need comfort. I don't need, and that really then was pulling my heart away from him. So you can see with these slow fades, what they're doing, I mean, certainly there were ways I had unrealistic expectations. There were ways he avoided emotion, but we definitely had ones that played out more for each of us
Yeah.
individually as well.
Yeah.
Well, and then two, you don't just say, okay, here are the problems in your No More Perfect Marriages. You have God tools to help people overcome those. So I think it's such a positive and inspirational. It's wrapped around your story, but shows how it played out and ways couples can counter that. And those are some things that you share. You do marriage intensives, the
Yes.
marriage 2.0 intensives, where you help people get to that spot.
Yep. We work with one couple at a time. They come to
Right.
our home. We work with them from Friday to Sunday and help them to begin that process of moving into that 2.0 place. We love that.
Yeah. We love just being able to focus on one couple, their story, unpacking their story, and then offering them hope and help on the other side. And it's been very successful. It's been huge. Jill and I say we have a front row seat at watching God work.
Mm-hmm.
And
For sure.
sometimes those couples have gone through the same thing as you have,
Right.
Kelly. But you said sometimes you're seeing more and more that have that long-term marriage, that gray divorce phenomena, and trying to get them back on track. They've been fading for a long time, which is one reason that's something that you put in this book. And I have to give a special plug to this one. My prayer group did this one and just
Uh,
really enjoyed it. It was really meaningful to us personally. But
Yeah. Right.
kind
We
of that hit that.
Yeah, exactly. I have a chapter in Empty Nest Full Life that is about marriage. And after the kids leave, oftentimes what happens is we feel very disconnected because the kids were running a buffer for our marriage. And it was the kids' activities that kind of kept us connected. And then they leave, and then you're just like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I don't even understand this. And there is a phenomena, gray divorces, silver divorces, sometimes they're called. And that is because those slow fades have been happening for so long, and people then are hopeless to think it could get better. But what we want people to know is it can. And you're right. We have had a huge increase in our marriage 2.0 intensives of couples in their empty nest season of life, many married. In fact, last year we had 3 weekends in a row. One couple married 49 years, one couple married 50 years, and one couple married 51 years. That none of them were dealing with infidelity recovery.
No.
They all just needed help and bless their hearts. I mean, you can imagine these people are in their early 70s,
Yeah.
right? Or late 60s. What I love is it's never too late.
No.
It's never too late to see things through a better lens, to understand the dynamics playing out, to stop the fades, to learn the God tools,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to connect at a deeper level, no matter where you are in the
Right.
process. It's never too late.
No.
That is so encouraging. And your website is just a wealth of information. If you sign up for one newsletter, things land in your inbox that are so helpful and beneficial. So, Marriage Champions, you would really be remiss if you do not check out the Savages website. And I do want to say they do have resources that came out in 2022. Your heart is broken, the next steps for when your spouse is unfaithful, and that I really messed up. You have a companion. Let's just take just a minute to just touch on those really quickly, because I don't want our Marriage Champions to miss out on that.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, those 2 resources and then our 2 courses are probably the most important that people know about. But yes, we have 2 books. They're available on Amazon. One is I Really Messed Up, How to Heal Your Marriage After an Affair. And then My Heart is Broken, What to Do If Your Spouse is Unfaithful. So they're designed that they can be read individually, or that if a couple is working together, they can obviously both read whichever book applies to them. So that is a resource. And then we have our Rebuilding Trust course, which helps couples to rebuild trust. We do have our No More Perfect Marriages, which is just for any marriage. That course is available online. And then we have our The Wait Is Not Wasted course. And that is for people who are standing for their marriage, believing like I did for that year, where they're believing that God can restore, and they're going to give God time to do that, in essence. And so I created a course. We did it together that helps. It's really a personal growth course that helps them to stand firm, learn to love God's way, invite their spouse back into the relationship with love, like I learned how to do. So all of that is available online. And we would love for you to, if you need it for your marriage, tap into it. But if you know somebody who needs those resources, please share them.
Well, that is just there. There are not very many good resources in that space, and so, and then you guys are the living testimony of of what God can do, and ways to stay faithful. Thank you so much. It is so delightful talking with you. You guys are such an inspiration to so many. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yes.
And Marriage Champions, if you'd like to find out more about Jill and Mark, you can always find us at marriageinitiative.org.